Hello and welcome to today's webinar. Use Office 365 and Teams to work with clients, partners, and suppliers. A couple of housekeeping items before we get started. You're welcome to submit questions at any time using the chat window on your screen. We'll address them during the Q&A session at the end of today's webinar. If we don't manage to answer all of your questions, someone will follow up with you shortly via email. If you're interested in trying out the enterprise version of Harmony, please send us a request in the chat window and someone will contact you after the webinar to get you started. We'll also make a recording of the webcast available to you within a couple of days. And it's my pleasure to introduce you to today's speaker, Richard Poole, Chief Technology Officer of EMEA at Harmony. Richard heads up the pre-sales team for Harmony across the EMEA and Asia Pacific regions, working both directly with key accounts as well as Harmony's partner channel. Bringing with him almost 20 years of experience in data management systems, Richard has helped many companies to realize the significant benefits in productivity that collaborative platforms enable. Richard, please get us started.
Thank you, Susan, and welcome everyone. So some of you may already know Harmony, some of you may have looked at Harmony in the past, or this might be the first time you're looking at Harmony during this session today. But we're very much adding some focus onto integrating with Teams and utilizing Teams as well as the rest of the Office 365 suite to really help people, end users and business users, to collaborate and work with their clients, partners, and suppliers, as well as their internal colleagues as well. So Teams is kind of quite talked about subject right now. I think Microsoft have had a really big push on rolling it out to everyone and getting people to utilize Teams, and a lot of companies are really embracing some of the functionality that Teams brings, whether it's coming from a replacement for Skype, for example, for the kind of voice over IP and instant messaging and chat, but also brings together kind of a collaborative platform and ties together some of the parts of different ways of collaborating. And it's really has been a very fast uptake. So we'd just like to ask you a first poll question.
So please let us know if you're already using Microsoft Teams. Are you using it across your whole organization? Maybe just in your department, but not across your whole organization yet? Running a pilot, planning to use it soon, or you don't have any plans at this time to use Teams? Give us an idea of who's in the audience today. Okay, Richard, let's show you. And share.
Okay, excellent, thank you. So yeah, I mean, it looks like about a third of people are using it across the organization. But actually, I think the vast majority are either using Teams or planning to, with only a very small percentage of people not planning to use Teams at all. So yeah, that's kind of, I think, fairly representative of what we see when we speak to companies and customers and partners and things as well. So Teams, as we said, is widely used. Great set of tools, and it also does come with its challenges, as any new technology does. Obviously, there's a lot of interest in Teams, like we've said, and I think one of the challenges is kind of getting people to use it in the right way, and kind of controlling some of the way of using it. So if we take a look at a few of the kind of challenges that we see that Teams brings in, and the first one of those really is that there's a bit of a disconnect between using Teams for internal communication, like conversations and chats and things, and actually communicating with external parties, which is still typically done by email. So people do need to continue to communicate with people outside the organization with email, not just because of the technology involved, but very often because of the kind of governance needs. That organizations need to be able to maintain records of their interactions with their partners and customers, and they can't necessarily just rely on Teams, which is hosted in one Microsoft organization for their kind of inter-organizational communications. So most people, as much as they want to use Teams and are using Teams internally, in fact, we do ourselves, still have to use both Teams and Outlook to actually get all of their work done. And it's very difficult to kind of connect the two. I'm personally, it's quite challenging to be kind of switching and almost watching but two different interfaces. Outlook for your emails, which you're both receiving and sending, but also Teams, which you're interacting with internally. So with that, we'd just like to ask you what your thoughts are about that kind of disconnect.
Right. So please let us know, since you have started using Teams, has the amount of email you're using increased, decreased? Not really a measurable difference. You don't know, or you're not using Teams. I'll give you a second. There you go, Richard. There's the
Okay,
result.
thank you. So I think it looks like the vast majority are saying there that there's no real measurable difference between the amount of emails that people are sending and receiving since using Teams, and that's absolutely, as I say, people continue to need to use email to collaborate externally, and particularly, with documentation, whether it's contracts going backwards and forwards, or design specifications, or drawing plans, or whatever it is in your particular business. There's documents that need to go backwards and forwards, and also the emails themselves. An email is like a fax used to be considered. That what's said in an email is kind of a legal entity. So absolutely, there is that requirement to still use email as well as Teams. I think the next challenge that we often see with Teams is that actually the more people use Teams, the more difficult it is to find content and find and stay focused on what you actually need to do, because it's very easy to create a team, create a new channel. Lots of people, every time like a new group of people get together for a particular purpose, they may well create a new team. Or there may be, anytime a new subject comes up, a new channel is created. So there's a lot of you're going to end up with lots of teams and lots of channels, and it can be quite confusing to end users, particularly when they actually need to find content. What's been said, what's been saved, and also when maybe what particular version of a document is being sent to somebody. So it's very much a challenge to kind of keep some control over that kind of Teams rollout. But also, once it has been rolled out, and I think obviously Microsoft are adding some capabilities around kind of governance of Teams and things, it's still very challenging for people to actually find the content and navigate around. So with that, we'd just like to ask your feedback on that as well.
So for those of you who are using Teams, are you finding it easier or harder at this point to find your documents and emails? And easier or harder, no difference? You don't really know, or you're not using Teams for this? right, let me show you what people are saying, Richard. There you go.
Okay, thank you. Well, that's an interesting one. um, Obviously, in contrast to the previous question we asked, actually, it is making a difference. It's almost 50-50 split between some people finding it easier, some people finding it harder. Slightly pipping the post is the kind of harder side of things. But so yeah, I mean, obviously, I think it depends on the people's kind of attitude towards maybe a new interface and being able to navigate around in a different way. So yes, it is certainly something to consider. Is it actually more difficult to actually find content when you are using Teams? And maybe that also depends on how far you are in your rollout and your usage of Teams as well. And the third challenge that we see is that it's very difficult to define, for example, how to retain emails and documents in Teams from a compliance point of view to actually apply, let's say, retention policies and things on how long should content be stored for, what type of content should be stored and how, and that can't necessarily be automated in a complete manner. So that is definitely a challenge as well. So what we'd like to do is kind of go through a story to actually bring those challenges to life. And I think as we go through it, I think you'll identify very much with the story that we're telling. And so this is two fictitious companies, Honor and Glory, and they're actually two manufacturing companies that are going through a merger. And so maybe in this scenario, Glory is a very successful manufacturer of industrial robots, making tons and tons of money selling those robots, and they basically can't get enough out of the door. That they can't make enough to fulfill the demand. But equally, we've got another company called Honor. And they've Glory has decided to explore a merger with Honor, who are essentially maybe one of their competitors or something. So they're actually in the same space, and by merging, they could have a lot more success. So we're going to look at two different personas in those two companies. So Megan is a business analyst at Glory, and she was tasked with building a business case for the merger with Honor. But suddenly, out of nowhere, a serious tax concern has appeared. And what can Megan actually do to progress that and alleviate any kind of concerns and move on with the merger? So Megan's introduced to a client account manager at a consultant called Fred. And Fred and his team of advisors provide tax advice to corporate clients like Glory. And how can Fred and his team actually utilize Teams to deliver Megan and Glory from the kind of tax implications that the merger may entail? So they need to work together to get the merger done and achieved. And so the first step of that is that Megan has questions about the tax implications of the merger. So she sends an email to Fred with an attachment of some criteria. And Fred receives that email, but he's actually using Teams to have an internal discussion with his colleagues in order to advise the client. Now, Fred's team work within Teams and SharePoint and Outlook with emails going backwards and forwards, conversations in Teams and documents in SharePoint in order to respond back to Megan. But Megan's got some more questions, and so some further email dialogue goes backwards and forwards. And Fred formulates a final tax opinion letter, and sends that to Megan and designates that the email and the attachments need to be retained for 7 years for that kind of tax advisory purposes. So there's actually lots of interactions there, backwards and forwards, in both email and Teams and SharePoint with internal colleagues and external clients. So how can we actually achieve that? Well, Harmony, today we're announcing new capabilities in a new version of Harmony called Smart Assistant, which adds the capabilities to interact with Teams directly from your Outlook interface. So it allows me to capture the documentation and continue the conversation in Teams. So let's take a look at how that actually pans out in a demonstration. So we can see here in my environment that we've created a number of teams and channels within my organization, and there's lots of internal dialogue around the particular clients that we're working with, and but I'm receiving kind of communication by email from the client. So in this case, as we saw in the example, Megan has sent Fred an email with the kind of documentation for that merger. Now he wants to discuss that internally. So how do I get from this email to the interface in Teams to collaborate with my colleagues? With Harmony Smart Assistant, I can drag and drop that email into the channel. And what that will do, it will actually save the email in the shared mailbox or the group mailbox of the team. And it will also put the attachments into the SharePoint library that's associated with that team as well. So here I'm actually saving 3 different entities, the email and both of the attachments, and Smart Assistant is uploading those into the relevant locations. And what I can do is I can assign metadata to all 3 of those items. So actually taking the metadata from the SharePoint library that's associated with this team and this channel. And so, for example, I can set this to say that it's to do with a merger that we're working on. And when I hit save, it's actually, as I say, saving the email and the attachments in the relevant places, building a link between them, and allowing me to actually interact with those from Teams. So once those items have been saved into the relevant locations, we'll see that I'll be able to actually start a conversation directly from the Harmony sidebar. Let's take a different email there. Now that those items have been saved, I can start that conversation from here. So I'm going to post to the channel, and I can continue that conversation in Teams. So Harmony's taking me to the relevant location and the relevant post that we can see that I've just added. So in fact, in this instance, the email is now available from the team. A post has been added with a mention to the channel. And it means that now my colleagues can actually reply to that post, and we can have that internal dialogue. So let's say we need to discuss this. Fred's colleagues can reply to that, start a meeting from there, or whatever they need to do around that email and that attachment that have been received. So in this case, I could open up the email just by clicking on it in the Teams interface. And one of my colleagues may need to reply or respond to that email, but you'll see there that the email has now got a link to the document in SharePoint, which I can also get to directly from the Teams interface as well. Even from Harmony, I can go directly to the associated files in that particular library that's associated with the channel. And so we can see that actually I can work on the document internally, I can check in and check out directly from the Harmony interface, but also maybe if I need to actually send that document to the client, I can do that directly from here as well. So it might be that I want to reply back to the original email that we had from Megan. And I can simply drag and drop, let's say, the tax letter that we've been working on from the sidebar into the email. And I can either send that as a link or as an attachment if I need to, just by holding down the Alt key while I drag and drop. So even now, when I'm composing the email back to the client with the final advice, I can do that directly from a single interface. But also, if you remember, maybe in that scenario, I need to actually retain this tax advice for a particular period of time. So I can now select that document in the sidebar, and I can apply a retention label to that particular document. And we can see here, for example, I can apply that directly from here, so that, you know, maybe if somebody tried to delete that document now that has that label applied, I won't be able to because that retention label has actually been applied to the document. So let's go back to our scenario. And we can see that both the client and the tax advisor can work together very efficiently, utilizing both Teams, Outlook, email, and SharePoint in one single fluid flow. And obviously in this scenario, the merger of the two companies is successful. So just to kind of follow on from that, you know, maybe further down the line, we could see that, okay, again, Fred works for the tax consultant. So he receives a similar question about another merger that has similar tax implications from another client. And so he can remember that he's worked on this before, or maybe he's just looking for activity where he can reutilize the similar kind of scenario. So if we go and take a look at that. In the Harmony interface here, we can actually go to the team, the accounts team there, and we can organize that by the channels that we're seeing. So in this case, I can now see all of the relevant content that's been saved against that team or that channel. And I can also apply filters to say, okay, I remember that there was something about, you know, some tax advice we gave previously about a merger. And so I can actually apply that to filter the content that's been saved in Office 365 based on the team, the channel, and the metadata that we assigned to that content as well, whether it's an email or a document in the channel. So Teams is great for internal collaboration, and email still persists as being the kind of default for external communication. So it's very much needed. So to work with both together, Harmony Smart Assistant, which we're releasing today, is the answer. And it allows you to connect emails, documents, and conversations in Teams, as well as SharePoint. With that, we'd just like to ask you a final poll question.
So if you would like to be contacted by a Harmony representative to learn more about the new release of Harmony or to trial it, please let us know as a customer if you'd just like to trial it or if you have some questions. And while you're answering that, let me ask Richard the questions that you are asking him. Does Teams replace the need for SharePoint?
Not entirely. I mean, obviously, we've been working with SharePoint for many years now, and all of our customers are saving content from Outlook, for example, to SharePoint, whether that's emails or documents, attachments, or a mixture of all of the above. And Teams obviously kind of complements that. But it also brings you to options to say, okay, well, the email, for example, could be stored in the team mailbox, or it could be stored in the SharePoint library that's associated with the team. So we will be giving users the option to save emails and documents either in the group mailbox or team mailbox or in SharePoint, depending on the requirements that you have, because there are benefits to doing either approach. And obviously SharePoint, you can add in additional mechanisms and have the content, the emails and the documents in one place. Or if you're looking from a more kind of keeping emails in exchange point of view, kind of like from a in-place management approach, then you can use the option to save the emails in the team mailbox instead.
Thank you. Is there a way to show which documents have retention periods, and are the retention labels published per team or across SharePoint?
So the retention labels are coming from the SharePoint library that you're looking at when you're either reviewing or applying those retention labels to the content. So it's working in the same way as SharePoint, and it's picking those up from the SharePoint location. So, for example, if you want to expose the labels as columns and create views based on those, you could do those in the SharePoint library and they'd come through into Harmony.
Thank you. Is the Smart Assistant part of the updated version of Harmony that is due to be released this month?
Yes, it is. It is the kind of the main new functionality that we're adding to the new version of Harmony, so Harmony 8, essentially, which we are releasing today. And so the Smart Assistant is part of that. It's a kind of a collection of features within the Harmony client that allows you to work with Teams as well as SharePoint. And you can continue to work in the same way as we always have done. Your SharePoint libraries and sites and things are still exposed in the Harmony sidebar. And this is adding some extra functionality that you can utilize. And it might be that you actually utilize both, that, like for ad hoc communication, that you use a kind of Teams approach, but for more formal records management and kind of final documentation, that you actually use the kind of SharePoint library approach. Or it might be in one department, or some departments use Teams and some departments, say maybe legal, for example, use the SharePoint approach. And Harmony can facilitate both of those approaches.
Thank you. Does Harmony the new Teams integration also work from Outlook on the web app?
In the new version that we're releasing today, it's only in the desktop client that we have for Outlook. In the future, we do plan to add functionality to the Outlook web app version as well. Obviously, we are limited in some ways of the APIs that are available to us there, but our vision is to make the Smart Assistant and the Teams integration actually available across different interfaces as well.
I'm going to get you a couple more questions. What about a deleted Teams channel? You know, just like us, sometimes there are so many channels. If you delete a channel, can you still find emails?
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
So when you delete a channel, you are asked what happens with the content of that channel. So that's more a kind of Teams, I guess, question. Harmony is just exposing those. So it's just a case of, for example, if you delete a channel from a team in the Harmony interface, that channel will no longer be there because it's been deleted. You can also choose to hide channels and things that you don't want to see in Harmony, much like in the Teams interface itself. But obviously, when you delete a channel, you need to decide what happens to the content that has been saved in that channel, because essentially, like an email will go into the mailbox for the team. So deleting the channel wouldn't necessarily delete the emails because they're still relating to the team mailbox. And likewise, when you create a channel from a SharePoint point of view, it creates a folder in the library for the team. So it might delete or move the content within the library depending on kind of the options that you set in Teams.
Thank you, Richard. Do I need a special setup to use this new Teams functionality, Smart Assistant?
Nothing special. Obviously, you need to be on Office 365 in order to utilize Teams anyway. So it is an interface specifically for Office 365. But beyond that, there's no kind of special configuration in terms of actually adding it into the sidebar. If you install the new version of Harmony on a fresh machine, it will actually ask you, do you want to add your Teams and your SharePoint sites? If you're an existing customer, then you can add that functionality just by enabling the option and choosing which teams and channels you want to see in the sidebar.
Great. One last question. Oh, two last questions I think we should ask here. So is this upgrade to Harmony 8 free of charge?
It's included in your existing subscription license fee, so you're entitled to upgrades and support, and this is an upgrade to your existing Harmony version. As I say, it's included as part of Harmony 8.
And you might want to wait till tomorrow to try to do that because it will be up today.
Okay, yeah.
One more question. Can the Conversations tab be displayed in Harmony?
The Conversations tab. So, 1 second. So the Conversations tab here. We're not exposing that in Harmony at the moment. I mean, right now we can see that when I click on the Teams tab that we're adding, it's actually showing emails, attachments, and documents from the team. We are considering whether we can add conversation entities there as well, so you can see what has been discussed. Also, we're obviously applying the kind of metadata or the what we call descriptive labels to the emails and the attachments, and we could potentially add those to the conversation entities as well. So that's something that we are considering for a future version of Harmony 8.
Great. Thank you, Richard, for that presentation, explanation, and answering all those wonderful questions. Thank you, all of you, for joining us today. You will receive an email with a link to view this webinar again in a couple of days. And we look forward to meeting you again at our next webinar. Thank you.